I'm Jeff Helfrich, State Representative for House District 52. Life's messy, government's messier. When I was on the street, I got to see what worked and what didn't work. And in Salem, I see a lot of things that aren't working. I want to cut through that red tape, get to simpler government, and get to stuff that works for you. Here's our next episode. That's perfect, right? All right, welcome back to Basics, everybody. I'm Jeff Helfrich, your host. Today, I have got Ed Diehl here in studio. He's a representative for House District 17. Ed, thanks for being on the show, man.
Absolutely, Jeff. It's great.
You know, it's been great getting to know you over the years and stuff, but let's roll right into this. Let's get back to basics.
You bet.
So I'm going to read a little bit here. This is how I roll with you, Ed. It's so before we dive in, Ed, you're a state representative for Oregon House District 17. You were elected in 2022 and reelected in 24. And you're serving through the 2027 term.
Yep.
You were born and raised in Plains, Montana. You come from a long line of sawmillers and loggers. Your grandfather's sawmill was the biggest employer in a town during the 50s and 60s. You moved to Oregon in 89, settling in Scio in 97 with your wife, Jamie, where you raised 2 kids in the Santiam community. You have a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford, specializing in smart production design. You co-founded Concept Systems, growing up from a coffee shop idea to a 100-employee company with 3 different offices nationwide before semi-retiring. I like that, semi-retired. I don't think you've retired much.
No, I failed at retirement.
Yeah, you and I both. You were also an investor in a Motorized Precisions. It's a camera robotics company. You joined the Catholic Church in 2011, which was a life-changing moment for you. You served on the parish council at St. Bernard and Scio. And then another thing you and I have in common, we're both pilots. You love flying your Cirrus. I don't have a Cirrus. I had a Bonanza, but that needed some work, and so I got rid of that, working on another one. But you like rebuilding vehicles and raising goats. Is that right?
Goats, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a farmer, but I do have goats. They eat weeds.
I don't have to keep everything down.
Blackberries down, and
that's good. All right, let's go into this. So your roots as in the sawmill and growing up in Montana, what was one of the biggest lessons that you learned there working in that really blue collar town, and how does that affect what you learned there? How does that affect you and what your fight is in Salem and trying to get back to basics?
Well, I really have kind of that blue collar working man perspective, and you know, I got that from my dad and my grandpa. And that's kind of how everything I see, a lot of things I see, come from that perspective. How does this just affect regular folks? And something I learned is just the value of hard work and persistence. I saw the hours, my dad put in just to provide for my mom, and I had two younger brothers. And growing up in the 70s, things weren't so good economically during that time. And he was working 15, 16-hour days just to keep things going. So I remember that. That sticks with me.
Yeah.
And so that has in the back of my mind always.
So you kind of made me think about something in saying that, because growing up on the family farm and ranch for me is what I learned from my grandfather, and you sound like you learned it from your dad, is you showed up for your neighbors, right? You just showed up. Your dad showed up for the neighbors to help out and wherever they could.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Because I know you're in a lot of different things outside of the legislative body, but give me a couple examples that people can hear about that they don't know, like you show up for your neighbors helping just because that's who you are.
Well, you're making me think of a story about my dad that I still remember.
Yeah.
And this guy, I still remember it. Late at night, this guy drives up and he's got a flat tire and it's pouring rain outside. And so my dad goes out there with me and find the tools in the pouring rain and change this guy's tire. I didn't know who the guy was or anything, but that guy for like 2 years sent Christmas gifts back to my dad. And I just remember it because my dad just went out of the way to
he just went and did the right things for the right reasons, right?
Yeah. But, for me, it's about and this happened after I retired from my business. That was all encompassing. I was all in to build that from the ground up. And I traveled all over the place for that business. So I didn't really connect with community while I was building that. I was traveling so much. So after I retired from that and I sold my business interest, then I got into more community things. I joined, joining the Catholic Church got me connected with Knights of Columbus, which is a great charitable organization, fraternal organization. I serve on the board of Scio Hospital and Clinics. I got involved with the wildfire relief effort. The area of the state I represent got hit really hard with the Labor Day fires, 2020, Scio Canyon. And so I helped set up a relief center for the folks up the canyon. And I just see it as something you do to help the community. It's fulfilling for me.
Yeah.
And it also is something that needs to be done. So, and that's kind of what led me to joining the legislature. I don't need to do this flipping job, Jeff.
You do it because you want to, right?
I do it because I want to, and I feel like my perspectives need to be represented. And right. I think I bring something to the table as an engineer. Frankly, I think we need some more engineers in there. Nothing against law enforcement.
Oh, come on. There's like 2 of us in that building. 2 of us. That's it. We have attorneys. We have doctors in there too.
We got a lot of diversify.
We have to have some more diversity.
Yeah, right. But I want to see my values represented and do my part to turn the state around, because I think we're heading the wrong direction.
Yeah, you hit it right there. You nailed it on the head. State's going the wrong direction. We got to just roll.
Maybe we should get back to basics, Jeff.
Hey, I like that. Back to basics. Where'd you hear that? Right. I appreciate that. So your small business and leadership, you built a concept system. It was a coffee shop idea to 100 employees, and very successful. And that experience, how's that shaped your work in representing the district and taking what you learned in your business life and then applying that into how you've gone about conducting yourself in the building and policy-wise?
I definitely see all these bills, when the bill comes across my desk, is how is this going to impact business? Is this good for business?
Right.
Is it bad for business? And how would it affect my employees? And I come at it from the perspective of owning and building a business that, my partners and I just saw my partner yesterday, my old business partner. We wanted to build a business that we would want to work for as engineers.
Right.
And we'd worked at the same place before. We knew what worked, what didn't work. And that's what we tried to do. And I have always viewed it that way, that I want a business where people want to work. And so when I see overreaching some of the legislation that is promoted by the public sector unions that really is trying to get into these small businesses and tell them how to run their business, I am so averse to that. And then just the litany of regulations that make it harder and harder to run and build a business in this state.
Right.
So I look at it from a small business perspective, absolutely.
So what's one policy right now you're trying to chase down, being now that we're in the super minority, but just give me one policy just to cut through the red tape that's going to help businesses. Just what regulation, if you could cut the red tape and cut that, what would that be?
I have a bill that I brought. Unfortunately, it's not getting hearing, but it would require several state agencies to go through and evaluate their permitting processes. So the DEQ, a whole bunch of them.
Right.
Because something I hear from business upon business is just the bureaucracy and the delays they have to do just to get basic permits to build a home, to dig a hole on their own property.
Right.
So it would require all these state agencies to go through, analyze their permitting process, eliminate redundancies, and then identify a standard time frame for issuing permits, and then giving the legislature the opportunity to review those and then hold them accountable to those timeframes. And if you don't hit the time frame, if the business owners gets their money back from the agency, but they still got to go through with the permitting process. And another thing I was going to do to follow on with that is to establish a dashboard that would show the status of all the permits. So really trying to add some transparency and accountability to these agencies that are too often getting in the way. And I think these agencies, instead of being a roadblock, that's what it feels like. They're a roadblock to Oregonians. They're getting in the way. They should be, how can I help you? How can I help you get something done? And do it in a way that protects the environment, that meets the needs of the community, but really change that mindset within these state agencies.
Yeah. So your faith, your family values, you've been married, you're a man of faith. Every time we go into a caucus, I'd ask you when I was leader to say a prayer, you would, and you talk about those things. But, you've 32 years with Jamie, you got 2 kids, 3 grandkids. Your life kind of changed when you went to the Catholic Church in 2011.
Yeah.
And how does your faith and family values drive you in Salem and then your decision-making processes?
Yeah. Well, I didn't grow up in any faith. I grew up kind of agnostic, sometimes atheist. I never went to church. The whole thing was alien to me, I'd say. But at the same time, I grew up with those values.
Right.
And the interesting thing is I didn't connect them with the Christian faith. They were just the values,
right.
So it was only later in life when I really started to explore, go on a faith journey, and that led me to the Catholic Church about 11 years ago. I was baptized just a few months before my first grandchild was born, which is amazing. She's so her birthday, she's the same year as I'm Catholic.
Oh,
so
yeah.
But it was a life-changing experience for me because it kind of refocused my priorities.
Right.
It got me more involved in my community and serving, and really being willing to stand up and stand firm on issues that are important, that sometimes are uncomfortable to talk about. And we hear them every day, don't we, Jeff, in the building, especially these, some people call them social issues. I call them moral issues. And there's some defining issues of our time that I have very strong opinions about. Part of that comes from my faith. And so it kind of gives me the courage to stand up and talk about those things.
Let's unpack one of those because I know it's always it's always a topic during campaigns, and it's I was born and raised in a Catholic household, went to parochial school, and we are both pro-life, and we both fight for those values. And in Oregon, it's interesting being pro-life because you get labeled as all these other things that's going on. How's that kind of driven you and what you've learned in not just outside the building's a different story. It's just a different angle. Inside that building and trying to navigate that, it's just, you say you're pro-life, then all of a sudden people lose their minds.
Yeah, I know. One of my values is just the inherent dignity of human life. And that shows up in a lot of ways. It shows up in meaning that we need to take care of the most vulnerable among us. That includes people with intellectual and development disabilities. I serve on behavioral health and healthcare and human services. Mm-hmm. So, and it also extends to, the unborn. You talk about who's the most vulnerable among us. So but I also know, Jeff, as you do, that it's a divisive issue and not everybody agrees with us on that. So you try and find where we do have agreement.
Right.
And that's what I try and focus on. And in the case of my pro-life stance, where I do find we have agreement, is most people in this state would say that our current laws are extreme.
Right.
We have no limits on abortion. They can have an abortion at any time in pregnancy for any reason. And people do view that as extreme. And they do agree that there should be some limits.
Right.
But, in that building, those bills, they're never heard.
now they don't want to get on the record of saying they want to.
No.
This is too extreme.
They want to avoid the discussion
Yeah,
at all costs.
That's that's what's that to me is that's what's sad is having that actual in the square debate,
Yeah.
having a reasonable debate, and not being yelled down, all those things that go along with that. And where I've seen like from when you and I first met in the building and how you've really grown into the role of state representative, you've not only say you dialed it back, but you've figured out where to pick and choose your battles and where to fight them at instead of everything was a fight. That's what I really admired in watching you grow into the role as a state rep, because it's a long haul. You just can't take every battle on.
Yeah, it's a long haul, and then I found that every session the battles are different.
Right, they're always moving.
They're always moving, and contentious committees can change from session to session. So, yeah.
So you've really pushed back against leftist policies, government overreach, and in your district, you've seen some of that just with the logging and I think those overreaching leftist policies, whether it's climate change or climate action things, right? And
Absolutely.
Then the other thing, two-part question. There's that part, and then the other part I want you to think about as you're answering the first part is there's the certificate of need that you've talked about. And to me, that seems like a government overreach thing too, because it's not allowing for things that we need. So why don't you dive into the far left of these policies that are hurting your district?
Well, there's so many of them, but let's focus on the certificate of need. And, what certificate of need, this will come as a surprise to most people that are not connected with government. But if you want to build a psychiatric care facility above a certain size in this state, you have to get permission, and you have to demonstrate to the state that there's a need for your services.
Right.
And then all your competitors have a chance to weigh in and refute your claim. It's unbelievable. Can you imagine any other business where you had to prove
You're
that there was
creating a monopoly,
a need?
right? They're creating their own monopoly.
It does create a monopoly. And so we have cases where we have investors that were willing to come in and build, in this case, psychiatric care facilities with their own money, with their own private capital, and the state blocks it. And I couldn't believe it. So Representative Lucetta Elmer, brought some legislation that I signed on with her just to open that up. And it's amazing the resistance we get to that. And you can look at other states that don't have it, and prices are lower, and availability is better.
Right.
So it's unbelievable, but it's kind of it's par for the course in Oregon. It's top down, state controlled attitude on everything, and certificate of need is just one of those examples.
When you said that, I started kind of thinking about that. It's like the government's controlling what's going out. That's almost a form of communism because the government wants to control everything, and what you get
everything.
And the price controls and everything else. They don't want to see an economic opportunity where people can actually deliver a better quality product at a cheaper price, and not be then other people won't be as competitive because they have to pay union wages, whatever it is, right?
Well,
whatever these things are.
So there's so many examples of that. When it comes to housing, we keep complaining about how expensive housing is, but then we keep passing regulations that make houses more expensive. And then
surprise, right?
Yeah. And then you come up with options to say, hey, if you make certain land available and let the market build homes. No, they don't want to do that. They want public money to build these homes.
Goes to
and
nonprofits.
It costs many times more, and it's funneled through nonprofits that are taking a big chunk of the money.
Go walk through that with people that don't understand.
We're still the whole nonprofit thing?
Walk that.
Gosh.
We all have been part of nonprofits, whatever it is, but some of these nonprofits I see is here's X amount of dollars, and then they kind of start peeling away administrative costs and things like that. What's your perspective on that? That's the big one right there.
So some nonprofits I think are awesome.
Absolutely.
I do. They do an amazing job. But I'll tell you, when it comes to what I call the homeless industrial complex, especially
the stabbing wagons like we talked about when we were doing 110 reforms. Yeah.
Yes.
Those.
These places are doing nothing but enabling the homeless and drug addiction problem. And I do connect those two for the street homelessness and drug addiction. Of course, they're connected. They are not helping people. They are enabling their addiction, and they're getting paid by the state to hand out foil and needles, clean needles, with your tax dollars. And the problem's not getting smaller; it's getting bigger. So we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these programs that unfortunately are not helping people. And so that's part of our battle right in there, to make sure that the dollars are accounted for. And there's actually some accountability in the behavior of people. I think that's what some of the change that was made with House Bill 4002, and how it's being implemented in my county, where we're at right now, Marion County. If you're doing drugs, you're going to go get treatment, or you're going to jail. And if you're dealing drugs, you're going to prison.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how we're treating it in Marion County, in an effort to curb this crisis.
Right.
So, and then part of that is you have to provide the right treatment programs. You have to have some accountability to where you're tracking them. If you're not going through the program, yes, you will go to jail.
Right.
And that accountability has been missing in the Oregon approach to this, which has devastated Portland.
So we were a cheap date when they came in and did Measure 110, $5 million.
I wasn't around then. Were you?
I was not in the legislative body
Okay.
then, no, but what it was is it wrecked our state. We lost a generation of people, and I took some hits in some news organizations. We didn't lose a whole generation. Yeah, we did. We've lost the ability for grandmothers, grandfathers, grandkids, and everybody have sit at the table. And you hit on something when I talked about the certificate of need and talking about treatment facilities. They then take, again, the better way to put it is, we have had a housing first policy for people that are homeless, but they'll give out a tent instead and not get people treatment. And so we spent hundreds, if not billions of dollars on this housing and then treatment, but nobody's getting any better. And we just keep handing this money out to these people. Oh, we've got a better idea. And I just don't understand that. And you talked about the certificate of need, and we can tie that all back together as like, are we actually helping people? Or are we making people richer somewhere along the line, right? I mean, like there's good nonprofits out there, no doubt, but there's some of them are just like, I question the stabbing wagon in Southern Oregon giving out needles and tinfoil, and they're rolling around in their van and making money. I don't understand that at all.
No, it makes no sense. Yeah. And related to that this whole housing first model with very basically low barrier or zero barrier housing. So we're building homes. Some of them are, $300,000 a unit for these apartments.
Right.
And putting people in them, but not requiring any to be drug free. And
accountability measures.
Accountability measures. One guy I know, he did this informal survey. He was walking along the streets asking people if they were living on the street. He's asking them if they have housing. I think it was like 20% of them actually had public housing, and they weren't using it.
Oh, yeah. Well, so you talk about the accountability. Like, there's a thing in the Dalles there was a lot of pushback from the neighbors in the city, and it's called the Annex, and it's an old hotel that they converted into housing, temporary housing, to get them into permanent housing. But part of the agreement was, in the contract was, if you use drugs, you are out. You have to meet these benchmarks to stay in this housing until you're able to get on your feet. And I think the accountability model, if we had that to go statewide in places like that, those are those nonprofits that work so well in getting people. You have a vision of people doing that instead of, they just need a hug. It's like, no, you need more than a hug to get people motivated.
Yeah.
The hugs are good, but you have to have motivating. You have to have motivating things behind it, right?
The amazing thing is there's models out there that provide that kind of housing with accountability. There's some skin in the game. The people are responsible for paying, if they have the ability to pay for part of their housing. They don't take any public money,
right? And
they work. I've heard testimony from them in committee where this organization saved their life,
right? And
they don't take a dime of public money to do it. So there's other ways to do it. Unfortunately, the way it's handled in Oregon is it's a very central control, top-down approach, And it's not just with how we deal with the homeless situation, it's everything.
Yeah.
Regulations. The tendency is to take more and more local control away.
Yeah.
Take control away from using our natural resources. And that includes our forest lands. It's just one thing after another.
So on all my episodes, I have this behind the scenes, behind the gavel. So this is for you as a legislator, behind the gavel. What is something that was eye-opening when you came in the legislature? And then what was that part when you were serving, or when you lived in Montana and with your dad and things that just kind of correlated this, you had this aha moment when you got in the legislature, but then helped drive you and keeps you centered and grounded in your journey through the legislative body?
Well, so one of the things that has really struck me, and I'd love to have a conversation on this, but a longer conversation on this, is the power and influence that the public sector unions have in that building. I knew it was strong, and I'm saying this, I'm not an anti-union person.
I was in a union for 25 years.
Yeah. My son's in one. But the power that they have in that building, and I just don't, I think it's an unfair situation for voters and taxpayers, because they raise money, they give that to people to get them elected, and then they bargain with themselves. They're bargaining with the same people that they got elected. And you can see it in bill after bill after bill, and several of them passed today. That, I did not realize how bad that problem was. They act like a fourth branch of government.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating, because you'll see one anti-business bill after another go out of there.
Would you call it a shadow government?
It can be called a shadow government, because they're not accountable to voters.
Right.
And you can put a new governor in, and that governor can assign new agency heads, but their ability to make any difference within these agencies is limited because of the union collective bargaining ability. And there's zero accountability to voters there. It to me, I don't even know how it's constitutional, frankly. I don't. So that's one big thing.
Right.
But you know what grounds me is I work with my wife.
Yep. Yes, you
I
do.
work with Jamie. She's my chief of staff, and we work with each other in our business. And so I tell you, if it wasn't for that, this job would be, I don't know if I could do this job, but we do it together. We talk shop all the time, except she's got to do her prayers and have her coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
Before I talk to her.
Yeah.
But she grounds me, because we shoot ideas back and forth. She helps me so much, and we can kind of recenter and put everything in perspective.
Yeah.
You know,
that's awesome. So kind of wrapping up, thanks for being on the show. I've enjoyed working with you. I've said that numerous times. And what is one takeaway to my back to basics philosophy that we talk about, slimming government down and changing the direction, cutting the red tape? What's one takeaway that you would want your listeners, your district, to know that you're fighting for to get this back to basics in Salem, that you're continuing, that's in the forefront of your mind?
One of the big things in my mind, and it connects with my heritage, is we need to be actively managing our forests.
Okay.
We need to apply some common sense to how
really
we deal
common
with
sense
to how we deal with our natural resources. And this isn't about cutting all the trees down. This is just about acknowledging that to have a healthy forest that's good to recreate, that provides good jobs, that looks beautiful, we need to manage it. And that means sustainably harvesting our forests, eliminating fuels. We can do all that stuff, and it's amazing how that gets blocked. And I'm optimistic, actually, that some of what's coming out of the Trump administration, in fact, just very recently, is saying we need to log again. And we need to acknowledge that helps the forests,
right,
and prevents wildfires and provides jobs and rural jobs. So That's one big thing to me, Jeff.
So taking the chaos of the Capitol that we see all the time and simplifying it down just to getting common sense solutions out there to help people. That's kind of what it's about.
That's it. I'm an engineer. I solve problems.
Yeah, you and I were.
So I come in there like this. Where's a problem? Okay, I'm gonna go solve it. Where's a problem? I'm sitting on the healthcare committee. What's a problem? Oh, hey, we need more care facilities. All right.
How do we do that?
We need more workers. Okay. Yeah. And it's amazing how many good ideas get blocked,
right?
Because they don't sit well with this public sector union or this licensing board. It's unbelievable. And I really think if voters actually were paying attention and knew, we wouldn't be in the shape we're in.
That's what this podcast is about, Ed, is getting people to understand what's going on behind the scenes in Salem. You get a chance to talk to legislators, but you and I have the same kind of approach. It's pragmatic. Here's a problem. Let's fix it. Move on to the next one. Let's do better.
Yeah.
So with that, Ed, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate
Jeff,
that.
It's great.
We're keeping it back to basics, keeping it simple, folks. Buckle up for the next show. We're going to hit it hard. All right. Thank you.